The afternoon sun fell gently across the wooden floor of the living room as Rachel sat with a book she hadn't been reading. Her mind was too full for stories. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that carried memories. She'd lived there for nearly 10 years with her husband Tom, and though she loved the home they'd built, lately it had felt empty. Tom worked long hours, and most evenings she ate dinner alone. The faint hum of the refrigerator keeping her company. That was when she heard the sound of the front door opening. Sudden, sharp, unfamiliar. She looked up, heart jumping for a moment, only to see a tall figure step in. It took her a second to recognize him. Ethan, she said in disbelief. Her stepson stood there, suitcase in hand, a faint smile on his face. "Hey, Rachel, it's been a while." Ski hadn't seen him in over 3 years. The last time, he'd been quiet and withdrawn at Thanksgiving, barely speaking during dinner. Now, standing in front of her, he looked older, not just by age, but by experience. His hair was longer, a little messy, his eyes softer but deeper. As if carrying stories he hadn't told anyone. "Your dad didn't mention you were coming," she said, still surprised. He chuckled faintly. "Yeah, he told me to surprise you. Said he'd be home late tonight." Rachel smiled politely. "Well, you did surprise me. Come in. I'll make you some tea." Ethan followed her into the kitchen, his movements slow, almost hesitant. She could tell he was nervous. The silence between them felt awkward, but not uncomfortable. She poured the tea, handed him a cup, and asked, "So, how have you been? Still in Seattle?" He nodded, staring at the mug. I left my job a few months ago. Just needed to get away from everything for a bit." She noticed the weight in his voice, but didn't push. "Sometimes getting away is the best thing you can do," she said gently. He looked up at her then, his expression softening. "You always say the right thing." Rachel smiled faintly but said nothing. She had always cared for him, though she'd never really been close to him. When she married Tom, Ethan was already in college. Their encounters had been polite, birthday calls, holiday visits, short conversations that never went beyond the surface. But now, standing across from him, she felt a quiet curiosity. He wasn't the distant boy she once knew. After tea, she showed him to his old room. She'd cleaned it weeks ago, not knowing why she felt the urge. Maybe some part of her knew he'd come back. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood, the same as before. But everything else had changed. New sheets, a new desk, sunlight streaming through white curtains. "This looks different," he said, glancing around. "Yeah, I tried to make it more comfortable," she replied. He smiled. "It's perfect." "Thanks, Rachel." There was warmth in the way he said her name, and it caught her off guard. She looked away quickly. "Dinner's at 7. You must be tired." "Exhausted," he admitted. "But it's good to be home." When she left his room, Rachel found herself stopping halfway down the hall. Home, that word lingered. She wondered if Tom even knew what it felt like anymore. That evening, as she cooked, she thought of how strange it felt having someone else in the house again. When Tom traveled, the silence often grew so deep that she turned on the television just to feel less alone. Now, there was another presence, a gentle reminder that life could still feel connected. Ethan joined her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up. "Need help?" She hesitated, then smiled. "You cook." "Not well," he admitted, "but I can chop vegetables." They worked side by side, laughter slipping in between small talk. She learned that he had been working as a designer, that his last relationship had ended badly, that he was still figuring out who he wanted to be. He, in turn, asked her about the house, her music classes, and her garden things Tom rarely asked anymore by the time dinner was ready. The kitchen was filled with the kind of warmth she hadn't felt in years. Afterward, they sat across from each other, finishing their meal in soft conversation. "It feels strange being back," he said. "Everything looks smaller." Rachel smiled. "That's what growing up does. The world stays the same, but we outgrow it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why I came back to remember what used to make sense." She tilted her head, curious. "And did you find it?" He met her gaze for a second too long before looking away. "Not yet. The clock ticked between them, the kind of silence that carried meaning but no words. When Tom finally came home late that night, the house was dark except for the light in the living room. Rachel was reading again, though her eyes weren't moving across the page. He looked tired, briefcase in hand. "Ethan made it, right?" "Yes," she said. "He's resting." "Good. I'll see him in the morning." Tom kissed her cheek quickly, more like habit than affection, and went upstairs. Rachel sat there for a moment, her thoughts wandering. The quiet that used to comfort her now felt heavier somehow. Something about Ethan's presence had stirred memories she hadn't visited in years of her own youth. Her own restless longing for something more than the routine her life had become. The next morning, she woke early to the smell of coffee. When she entered the kitchen, she saw Ethan at the counter pouring 2 cups. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Morning," she replied, surprised. "You didn't have to make coffee?" "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Old habit." She laughed softly. "Seems we both have that problem." They drank in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "You ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't really belong to you anymore?" The question startled her. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think everyone does at some point." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "I used to think you were too calm for that kind of thought." She smiled faintly. "Calm doesn't mean content." He nodded slowly. Understanding that later that day, she found herself thinking about that exchange more than she wanted to. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. There was something honest, unguarded in his voice. She had spent so many years speaking in half-truths, smiling when she felt tired, saying she was fine when she wasn't, that hearing someone speak plainly felt rare. That evening, Tom called to say he'd be late again. Rachel hung up the phone and looked around the quiet kitchen. "Looks like it's just us again," she said when Ethan walked in. "I don't mind," he said. "It's nice having company." They shared dinner again, this time easier, lighter. Afterward, they watched an old movie on TV. Halfway through, Rachel glanced over and saw Ethan laughing at something small. It made her smile too. When the movie ended, she stood and stretched. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Rachel," he said softly, his tone sincere. She paused before turning away. "I'm glad you're here." He smiled, a quiet warmth in his eyes. "Me too." That night as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. The rain tapped gently against the windows, and she found herself thinking about the moment when he first walked in, how the entire house had seemed to shift. Just slightly. Not because of anything he did, but because of what he brought back, a reminder of connection, of life beyond the ordinary. She wasn't sure what would happen next, or why it felt important, but she knew this. Ever since Ethan returned, the silence in the house didn't feel the same. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was possibility. And as she finally drifted to sleep, Rachel couldn't shake the quiet feeling that nothing in her world, not her home, not her heart, would ever feel quite the same again. The next morning, Portland awoke to a soft drizzle, the kind of rain that made streets glisten and leaves shine as though polished by sunlight. Rachel moved quietly through the house, carrying a tray with coffee and muffins to Ethan's room. She paused at the door, noticing it was slightly ajar. Through the opening, she saw him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out the window. The rain streaked the glass, and his gaze seemed as distant as the storm outside. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before returning to the view. "Morning," he replied, his voice calm but subdued. "You're up early." Rachel smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep. Old habits die hard, I guess." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Same here. Feels strange to be back in this room after all these years." She hesitated, unsure whether to push or give space. "Breakfast," she offered. "I made some muffins and coffee." He stood, brushing his hands over his jeans. "I'll help. It'll feel less awkward if I do something." Together, they moved into the kitchen, the tray between them like a small bridge across the silence that had lingered for years. They chopped fruit, brewed coffee, and cleaned up as if synchronizing without words. For the first time since his return, Rachel noticed the way his hands moved, confident and careful, yet gentle. It reminded her of someone she had long forgotten existed in her life, not the teenager she had known, but a man shaped by time and experience. As they sat down to eat, conversation flowed cautiously at first, then more freely. He told her about his travels after leaving college, about the challenges he faced, the moments of doubt, and the small victories he hadn't shared with anyone. Rachel listened, her attention unwavering, offering soft encouragement and occasionally sharing her own stories. She spoke about teaching piano, about the little triumphs her students achieved, and about the quiet routines of life that had once felt monotonous but now seemed comforting. Hours passed unnoticed. By mid-afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and fresh. Ethan had moved a few items around in his old room, arranging the furniture in a way that felt more like a young adult space rather than a teenager's. Rachel, carrying a basket of laundry, paused by his desk and noticed a sketch pad he had left open. Curious, she glanced at it. The page revealed a partially finished portrait of a woman. Delicate lines, expressive eyes, and a subtle sadness conveyed through shading. Rachel felt a quiet ache as she studied it. The woman in the drawing reminded her of someone she once knew. Though she couldn't place why it stirred something within her, Ethan appeared behind her as if sensing her presence. "I see you found that," he said softly. "I didn't mean to pry," she said, turning toward him, unsure how to voice what she felt. "It's just moving. Whoever she is, you captured something real." He shrugged lightly, but his eyes softened. "She's someone from a long time ago. Someone I couldn't forget. I guess I was trying to capture her before she disappeared completely from my mind." Rachel nodded, understanding more than he realized. There was a weight in his voice, an unspoken longing that reminded her of her own hidden ache, the quiet loneliness that came from caring for others, loving quietly and sometimes feeling invisible. From that day on, the dynamics of the house shifted subtly but unmistakably. Rachel found herself noticing little things. The way Ethan hummed while moving through the kitchen. The way he paused to admire the small changes she had made around. The house, the way his presence seemed to fill spaces that had previously felt empty. Their interactions were still polite, still careful. Right, there was an undercurrent, a shared recognition of understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. Evenings became a shared ritual. Often, Tom was away on late business trips, leaving Rachel and Ethan alone. They would cook dinner together, tidy the house, or simply sit with mugs of tea, letting conversation drift naturally. They discovered shared interests, music, photography, and quiet walks along the riverbank that ran behind the property. Rachel noticed how her heart felt lighter in his presence, a warmth that had been missing for years. One evening, a sudden thunderstorm rolled over Portland. The first clap of thunder rattled the windows and sent shivers through the house. Rachel was in the hallway when she heard a soft knock on the door. "It's me," Ethan said, his voice calm yet slightly hesitant. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, trying to sound steady. Her pulse, however, betrayed her, quickening in ways she hadn't expected. "I'll check the fuse box," he offered, flashlight in hand, before disappearing into the basement. The house felt vast and quiet in his absence, yet the familiarity of his presence lingered. When he returned minutes later, soaked from rain seeping through the basement walls, Rachel handed him a towel, feeling an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Thanks," he said quietly, accepting it. Their fingers brushed briefly, a fleeting contact that carried warmth neither fully acknowledged. They shared a moment of silence, heavy yet comforting, before Rachel suggested he'd change into dry clothes. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the events of the day, the sketch, the shared breakfast, the quiet moments during the storm. It was as if each interaction had shifted something subtle but undeniable. She realized that Ethan's return had stirred emotions she hadn't expected, a mixture of protectiveness, empathy, and admiration for the man he had become. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it was deep and affecting, altering how she viewed her daily life and her own emotional world. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel noticed changes in her routines. She smiled more often, laughed more freely, and found herself lingering in rooms longer when he was around. Ethan, too, seemed transformed by the shared domestic rhythm. He began taking care of small repairs around the house, watering plants, and engaging more openly with the students Rachel taught after school. Each action, subtle as it seemed, built a bridge between them, not one crossing boundaries improperly, but one connecting to hearts that had been lonely for different reasons. One afternoon, while tidying the living room, Rachel caught a glimpse of Ethan sketching in his notebook by the window. Curious, she approached. "That's beautiful," she said softly, admiring the lines on the page, a detailed study of the backyard garden in bloom. He looked up, his face calm, and smiled faintly. "Thanks. I like to capture what feels right, even if only for a moment." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding of mutual respect and emotional intimacy. Not love in its conventional form, but a connection that mattered deeply. Both recognized it, both felt it, and both silently acknowledged that their lives were intertwined in a meaningful way. As evening approached, they shared a quiet dinner. The house, once heavy with silence and unspoken tension, now felt alive. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and fragrant. Shadows of the past lingered faintly in Rachel's mind, but she realized that these new moments were gradually replacing them with warmth, understanding, and a sense of companionship she had thought she lost long ago. That night, as Rachel prepared for bed, she stood for a moment in the hallway outside Ethan's room, listening to the soft sounds of him arranging his belongings. There was a calm in the house she hadn't felt in years, a quiet hope that life could shift in small ways through presence, care, and shared understanding. She turned toward her bedroom, a faint smile touching her lips. For the first time since his arrival, she didn't feel anxious or uncertain about the days ahead. Something had changed. Not dramatically, not irreversibly, but subtly and profoundly. The return of her stepson had altered the rhythm of her home, the beat of her heart, and the quiet corners of her life. And she knew, without fully understanding how or why, that the next moments they shared would continue to change everything slowly, gently, and beautifully. The weeks that followed Ethan's return transformed the quiet rhythm of Rachel's life. Each day brought small, subtle shifts, moments that at first seemed ordinary, but gradually accumulated into a profound change in the atmosphere of the house. Morning routines, once solitary and predictable, now carried a sense of anticipation. Rachel would wake to the soft sound of footsteps in the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing, and the occasional hum of a song she didn't recognize but came from Ethan's lips. It was a simple, gentle presence that had begun to fill spaces she hadn't realized were empty. Ethan had found a rhythm in the house. He helped with repairs she had been postponing, fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, organized the garage, and even tended to the overgrown garden behind the house. His energy wasn't intrusive. It was steady and considerate, blending seamlessly into her daily life. Rachel noticed that the house itself seemed lighter, almost breathing again, and with it her own mood lifted. She smiled more easily, laughed at little jokes she might have ignored before, and found her evenings filled with warmth rather than quiet isolation. One afternoon, while putting away books in the living room, Rachel noticed a small sketch pinned to the fridge. It was a drawing of the house as seen from the backyard, sunlight breaking through scattered clouds, highlighting the garden in bloom. Beneath it, Ethan had written in small, neat letters, "Home is what you make of it." She stood silently for a moment, reading the words over and over. That simple message carried an unexpected depth, a reminder that even after years of distance and uncertainty, one could still create warmth, stability, and belonging. She felt a gentle ache in her chest, realizing that his presence had reminded her of what she had almost forgotten, the simple joy of being seen. understood and appreciated. The days continued to flow, marked by small shared rituals. Breakfasts together became a quiet tradition. They laughed over burnt toast, discussed news articles or music, and occasionally fell into companionable silence. Their conversations were never heavy or forced. Instead, they allowed a natural intimacy to grow, one built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experience. Rachel often found herself noticing little details, the way he concentrated when fixing something, the way his laughter carried through the house, the way he carefully arranged his belongings in his room. Each observation was a small thread weaving their lives closer together, creating a bond that was subtle yet undeniable. One evening, as the sun set and cast amber light across the living room, Rachel and Ethan shared a quiet moment on the couch. The power had gone out unexpectedly, leaving the room bathed in the soft glow of candles. They sat side by side, listening to the distant rumble of a thunderstorm outside. "I've missed this," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. The quiet, the simple things. Being here. Rachel glanced at him, her heart stirring at the honesty in his voice. "It's good to have you here," she said softly. "The house. It feels alive again." He looked at her then, a faint smile touching his lips. "I didn't realize how much I needed this. Not just the house, but this. A place where things feel steady." Rachel nodded, understanding more than he could know. For years, she had lived in the rhythm of routines that left little room for surprises or emotional connection. Yet here was someone who quietly shifted everything, not by force or demand, but by presence and attentiveness. Their eyes met briefly, carrying a wordless acknowledgement of the changes they had wrought in each other's lives. In the following days, they continued to grow closer in ways that were subtle yet profound. Rachel found herself laughing more easily, discovering new joy in teaching her students, and appreciating small moments that she had once overlooked: the warmth of the sun on the kitchen counter, the smell of freshly baked bread, the way leaves rustled in the garden. Ethan, too, seemed lighter, more open, and more present than she had ever seen him. He shared stories of his travels, spoke of hopes and regrets, and occasionally allowed her to see the vulnerabilities he usually kept hidden. One afternoon, while Rachel was organizing old photo albums, Ethan appeared behind her with a cup of tea. "Thought you might need a break," he said gently. She turned, accepting the cup, and noticed the small smile he offered, one that conveyed care without expectation. They sat together on the couch, flipping through photographs of past holidays, family events, and candid moments. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and at times quiet reflection. Rachel felt a sense of companionship she hadn't realized she had been missing. Time passed, and the subtle bond between them continued to deepen. Yet Rachel was careful with her emotions. She understood the boundaries of their relationship. Her feelings for Ethan were not romantic in the conventional sense. They were a mixture of appreciation, affection, and deep emotional intimacy. She recognized that he had become a mirror for her own unspoken needs, the desire to be seen, the comfort of shared understanding, and the quiet joy of mutual respect. It was a mature connection, rooted in care and emotional honesty, not fleeting passion or inappropriate attraction. One evening, after a long day of rain, Ethan prepared a small dinner for both of them. They ate together in the softly lit dining room, the storm outside providing a soothing backdrop. Conversation flowed easily, touching on memories, small hopes, and shared dreams. Rachel noticed that she was no longer anxious or uncertain in his presence. Instead, there was a quiet peace, a sense of balance restored to her life. She realized that Ethan's visit, which she had initially feared would disrupt her carefully ordered world, had instead brought clarity, warmth, and renewed purpose. Weeks later, Ethan's temporary stay drew to an end. He had accepted a new position in another city, a career opportunity that he had been waiting for. Rachel felt a mixture of pride and sadness as he packed his belongings. The house felt different already, quieter, but no longer empty. Their time together had left a lasting impact, one that neither of them would forget. Before leaving, Ethan found Rachel in the garden. the setting sun casting long shadows over the flowers she had tended. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but soft, "for letting me stay, for letting me be part of this place again." Rachel smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to have someone here, fully present. You've changed this house, and me, in ways I didn't expect." He hesitated, then added, "I don't know how long it will be before I can come back, but I'll carry this with me, everything I've learned here, and the way you made me feel at home." Tears prickled Rachel's eyes, but she blinked them away. "We've both changed," she said softly. "And sometimes that's all life asks of us, to grow, to connect, and to leave things better than we found them." They embraced briefly, a quiet and meaningful gesture of affection and mutual respect. It was not dramatic or romantic in a conventional sense, but it carried weight. It marked the culmination of shared experiences, subtle emotional growth, and the recognition of each other's value. After Ethan left, Rachel stood at the window, watching the street empty and the evening settle into calm. She reflected on the weeks that had passed. Everything had shifted, not because of dramatic events or grand gestures, but because of the quiet presence of someone who listened, understood, and cared. She realized that life was often altered by small, seemingly ordinary moments. A shared breakfast, a conversation by the window, a sketch left on a desk. These moments carried the power to transform hearts and homes alike in the following months. Rachel continued her life with renewed perspective. She nurtured her garden, taught her students with greater passion, and embraced moments of connection wherever they arose. Occasionally, she received postcards from Ethan's, sketches of places he had visited, simple messages expressing gratitude or reflection. Each card reminded her of the emotional journey they had shared, the growth they had inspired in one another, and the subtle, enduring bond that remained. She understood now that not all connections are meant to last forever. Some arrive to teach, to heal, and to remind us of the emotional richness of life. Ethan had been that person for her, a catalyst for rediscovery, understanding, and quiet joy. And she, in turn, had offered him the warmth and stability he had been seeking, even if he didn't realize it at first. On an ordinary evening, as she sat in the living room with a book unopened beside her, Rachel reflected on the simple truth that had emerged from this experience. Life changes in small, meaningful ways, often without warning. And the people who enter our lives, even temporarily, can leave an impact that resonates far beyond their presence. She smiled, the quiet of the house no longer heavy, but filled with memories of laughter, understanding, and shared humanity. And though Ethan was now miles away, Rachel felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had learned that emotional connections, care, and mutual respect could reshape a life more profoundly than any dramatic event. Her heart was lighter. Her home felt alive. And she knew that, when the time was right, life would continue to offer moments of connection, growth, and subtle transformation, just as it had on the day Ethan entered that room.